This is HOA rulebook. She called it community property and I called it stealing. I am recording this and it is going straight to management. Karen yelled that the rules let her search common areas, and she would start with my patio. I held my phone steady and did not move. She was standing 3 feet from my front door with a rolling cart stacked with color-coded binders and a bright orange cone already set down on the walkway like she owned the space. I live in Canyon Trails Community Association in Austin, Texas, and I just started a new job as a building inspector. I am on probation and I cannot afford to miss work for HOA hearings and constant disruptions. Dawn Fletcher is the compliance chair. She has light blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, a tan blazer with the hood up, and a cheap plastic badge clipped to her chest. She pointed at the torn package mailer sitting near my trash cans. She said she had reports I was running a package resale scam. She said that torn mailer proved I stole someone else's delivery. I said that mailer was mine and I could prove it with the tracking number. She ignored that and said I do not make the rules, I enforce them. She said she was starting an investigation and she could find me daily until I gave up. I asked to see the report. She said I was not entitled to see anything. She said my questions were harassment and that meant she could ignore facts. I stayed calm and kept recording. She set down another bright orange cone near my patio gate like she was marking a crime scene. She said she would be back tomorrow with access to search my patio storage, and if I blocked her, I would be trespassing on common property. I said the patio is part of my unit and she cannot enter without a warrant. She smiled and said the covenants gave her authority and she did not need a warrant. I called management that afternoon. The property manager said Dawn filed a formal complaint and there was a hearing notice being used as a bluff, and the deadline was today. She said if I did not respond by 5 p.m., the board could impose automatic fines. I said I just learned about it 5 minutes ago. She said Dawn delivered the notice yesterday and it was my responsibility to check my mailbox. I went to the mailbox cluster and found nothing. I checked my unit mailbox again. Nothing. I drove to the management office and requested a copy of the signed delivery receipt. The clerk said Dawn claimed she hand-delivered it and no receipt was required for hand delivery. I asked for the complaint file. The clerk said I could request records, but it would take 5 business days. I said the hearing was in 3 hours. She shrugged and said she could not waive the process. I asked to speak to the manager. She said the manager was off-site and would be back Monday. I left and called my neighbor Marcus. Marcus runs the community watch group and he is fed up with Dawn. He said Dawn has been pulling this kind of stunt for months. He said she deleted portal uploads, moved deadlines, and used recycled photos and fake violation notices. He said he would come to the hearing as a witness. I went back to my unit and started pulling evidence. I had the tracking number for that torn mailer. I had a doorbell camera clip that showed my porch at the time Dawn claimed I was stealing packages. I had a photo of my patio gate lock that proved it was never forced. I had a screenshot of the HOA portal showing my uploaded maintenance request from 2 weeks ago, and the timestamp on my upload proved Dawn deleted it the next day. I had a receipt from the pool office showing I paid my annual access fee in full in January. I had a copy of the bylaws that said compliance actions required written notice with a signature line, and Dawn never signed anything. I printed everything and put it in a binder. I drove to the clubhouse at 4:30. The hearing room was empty except for Dawn and a board member I did not recognize. Dawn had her rolling cart with the color-coded binders lined up like she was setting up a courtroom. She saw me and said I was late. I checked my watch. I was 10 minutes early. She said the hearing start time was revised to 4 p.m. and I missed the window. She said my appeal was invalid because it was missing a step she invented. She said I needed to submit a pre-hearing affidavit with notarized statements from witnesses, and I did not do that. I said that was not in the bylaws. She opened one of her binders and showed me a laminated page. She said it was an internal policy update from last month and all residents were notified by email. I checked my email on my phone. No notification. I showed her the screen. She said it was not her problem if I did not check spam. I said I wanted to proceed anyway. The board member looked uncomfortable and said he was not prepared to make a ruling without reviewing my evidence. Dawn cut him off and said the evidence was inadmissible because I did not follow the pre-hearing process. I said I would file a formal appeal. She said the appeal window closed when I missed the hearing. I said I did not miss the hearing. She said the revised time was binding and I was out of options. She said she was imposing a $50 administrative fee for wasting the board's time and she would add another $50 daily until I paid. I walked out. I called Marcus from the parking lot. He said he was pulling up in 2 minutes. I said the hearing was a sham and Dawn was stacking fees on fake deadlines. He said he had something that might help. He pulled in and handed me a sealed evidence bag with a small item inside. He said he found it near the pool equipment shed 2 days ago. He said he was holding it for me because he thought it might connect to Dawn's theft pattern. I looked through the plastic. It was a set of HOA pool keys on a lanyard. The lanyard had no readable text, but the design matched the official association colors. Marcus said those keys went missing from the pool office in March. He said Dawn reported it as a resident theft and used it to justify extra security patrols and access restrictions. I asked how he got the bag. He said he volunteers with the watch group and he was reviewing the shed area after a vandalism complaint. He said the keys were hidden under a tarp behind cleaning supplies. He said he bagged them and logged the location with a timestamp. He said he did not report it to Dawn because he wanted to see what she would do. I said this was huge. He said there was more. He said he had doorbell camera footage from his unit that showed Dawn walking toward my patio the night before she accused me of theft. He said the timestamp was 11 p.m. and she was carrying a small shopping bag. He said she walked past his camera angle and never came back the same way. I said that meant she planted the torn mailer. He nodded. I went home and synced the footage. My doorbell clip had no sound and Dawn tried to exploit that later, but the timestamp and angle were clear. The clip showed my porch was empty at 10 p.m. At 11:15 p.m. a shadow crossed the frame near my trash cans. The angle did not capture the face, but the clothing matched what Dawn wore earlier that day. At 11:20 p.m. the shadow left and the torn mailer was visible on the ground. I saved the clip to a USB drive and added it to my binder. I called the management office the next morning and requested a formal records review. The clerk said I needed to submit a written request with a records fee. I said I already requested the complaint file yesterday. She said that request was still pending and this was a separate request. I asked what the fee was. She said $15 per file. I asked how many files I needed. She said it depended on what I was requesting. I said I wanted the complaint file, the hearing notice log, the access key inventory, and the portal audit report. She said that was 4 files and $60. I paid with a card and she said the files would be ready in 5 business days. I said that was too slow. She said it was policy. I said I wanted to speak to the manager. She said the manager was in a meeting. I left my number and said I needed a callback by end of day. No callback came. I went back to the clubhouse at noon. Dawn was outside near the mailbox corridor talking to another resident. She saw me and raised her voice. She said I was harassing her and she had witnesses. I stopped 10 feet away and stayed calm. I said I was waiting to pick up records from the office. She said I was not allowed to loiter and she could call security. I said there was no security guard on duty. She pulled out a handheld radio and clicked the button like she was calling dispatch. I did not move. The other resident, a woman in her 60s, looked uncomfortable and walked away. Dawn kept talking into the radio, but no response came. She lowered the radio and said she was documenting this encounter. She said she would post a community warning and read it out loud at me in person. She pulled out her phone and started typing. She said the warning would go in the newsletter and on the bulletin board. She said it would say I was under investigation for theft and all residents should secure their packages and report suspicious activity. I said that was defamation. She said it was a public safety notice and she had discretion. She finished typing and showed me the screen. The post was already live on the resident portal. She said everyone would see it by the end of the day. I said I was filing a complaint with the Texas Attorney General for HOA abuse. She laughed and said the AG does not handle neighbor disputes. I said this was not a neighbor dispute. This was targeted harassment by an HOA official. She said I was wasting my time. I said I had evidence, and I would be happy to share it with the board and the management company. She said the management company worked for the HOA, not for residents. She said she was the only authorized contact for compliance matters, and any vendor or staff member who talked to me without her approval would be reported. I said that was obstruction. She said it was protocol. I left and called the pool office. The attendant said Dawn called that morning and revoked my access card. She said my account showed an outstanding administrative fee and a hold on amenities. I said the fee was fraudulent. She said she could not override it. I asked to speak to her supervisor. She said her supervisor was the property manager and I would need to go through the main office. I said I already tried that. She said she was sorry, but there was nothing she could do. I asked if she knew about the missing pool keys. She paused. She said she was aware. I asked if she filed a report. She said Dawn handled it. I asked if she saw the keys after they went missing. She said no. I thanked her and hung up. I drove to the tow company that contracts with the HOA. I know the dispatcher because I inspect commercial properties in the area. I asked him if Dawn called about my truck. He checked his log and said no, but she called twice last week about another resident. He said she tried to authorize a tow for expired registration, but the truck was current and he refused the job. He said Dawn argued with him for 10 minutes and threatened to switch vendors. He said he told her she could switch if she wanted, but he was not towing legal vehicles. I asked if he kept a record of the call. He said, yes. I asked if I could get a copy. He printed the call log and said it was public information. The log showed Dawn called from the clubhouse office and claimed she had board authority to order tows without verification. I added the log to my binder. I went back to my unit and checked the portal. Dawn posted a second update saying I failed to attend a mandatory compliance meeting. The post said I was uncooperative and the board was considering a suspension of voting rights. I screenshot the post. I checked the bylaws again. There was no mandatory compliance meeting requirement. I emailed the board secretary and asked for a copy of the meeting notice. No reply. I called Marcus and told him what was happening. He said he was coming over. He arrived 20 minutes later with another neighbor, an older man named Gene who lives near the clubhouse. Gene said he saw Dawn inside the pool equipment shed last week. He said she was alone and she was moving boxes. He said he thought it was strange because maintenance handles all pool storage. He said he did not report it because he did not think it was a big deal at the time. I asked if he remembered what day. He checked his phone calendar and said it was Thursday afternoon. I checked my records. That was the same week the pool keys went missing. I asked if he saw what was in the boxes. He said no, but one box had a torn flap and he saw plastic bags inside. He said he assumed it was cleaning supplies. Marcus said we should check the shed. I said we needed to be careful because Dawn would claim we were trespassing. Gene said he was on the landscaping committee and he had access to the shed for inspections. He said he could go in legally. I said that worked. We drove to the clubhouse. Gene unlocked the shed and we went inside. The space was packed with cleaning supplies, pool chemicals, and maintenance equipment. Gene pointed to a stack of boxes in the back corner. We checked the first box. It was full of old HOA newsletters and printed notices. We checked the second box. It had a torn flap and inside were plastic shopping bags. I opened one bag. It was full of small items, a phone charger, a package of batteries, a pair of sunglasses, a small Bluetooth speaker. I opened another bag. More random items. A keychain, a travel mug, a pack of pens. Marcus said this looked like stolen package contents. Gene said he never saw this stuff before. I took photos of the boxes and the contents. I did not touch anything else. Marcus said we should call the police. I said we needed to lock it down first so Dawn could not move it. Gene said he would stay and guard the shed. I said I would call the non-emergency line. I called and explained the situation. The dispatcher said she would send an officer to take a report. I gave her the address and said we would be outside the shed. She said an officer would arrive in about 20 minutes. I called the property manager and left a voicemail. I said we found stolen property in the pool shed and police were on the way. I said Dawn was the compliance chair and she had access to the shed. I said the HOA needed to preserve records and stop deleting portal uploads. The officer arrived and took our statements. He looked at the boxes and called his supervisor. A second officer arrived, and they photographed everything. The first officer asked who had access to the shed. Gene said maintenance staff, the pool attendant, and board members. The officer asked for a list of board members. Gene said he could get it from the clubhouse office. He came back with a printed roster. Dawn Fletcher was listed as compliance chair. The officer asked if anyone saw Dawn in the shed. Gene said he saw her last week. The officer wrote it down and gave me an incident number. He said the case would be assigned to a detective and someone would follow up. I went home and updated my binder. I now had the doorbell camera clip, the tracking number for the mailer, the portal audit screenshot, the pool key evidence bag, the tow company call log, the shed photos, and the police incident number. I had enough to prove Dawn planted evidence, lied about the hearing, deleted records, and was likely stealing packages and other items. I needed to get it in front of the board. The next board meeting was in 2 weeks. I submitted a formal agenda request to speak during open comment. The board secretary emailed back and said my request was approved, but I would be limited to 3 minutes. Dawn found out I was speaking. She sent me a certified letter saying I was banned from clubhouse property for harassment. She said if I showed up to the meeting, I would be removed by security. I called the property manager and asked if Dawn could ban a resident from a public board meeting. The manager said no. Board meetings were open to all residents under state law. I asked for that in writing. She sent me an email confirming residents could not be excluded from meetings except for disruptive behavior. I forwarded the email to Dawn and said I would be attending. She did not reply. The day before the meeting, Marcus called and said Dawn was trying to recruit vendors to pressure me. He said she called the landscaping company and claimed I was threatening contractors. The landscaping supervisor told Marcus that Dawn said I was under investigation and anyone who worked with me would lose their HOA contract. The supervisor ignored her and told Marcus about the call. I added that to my notes. I also learned that Dawn tried to take my phone during a confrontation and created chaos. It happened at the mailbox cluster. I was checking my mail and she walked up and demanded I delete the doorbell footage. I said no. She grabbed for my phone. I stepped back and held it away. She shouted that I was recording her without consent. I said we were in a public area and Texas is a one-party consent state. She tried again to grab the phone. Another resident, a woman named Lisa, saw the whole thing and yelled at Dawn to stop. Dawn turned and said Lisa was interfering with an official action. Lisa said she was calling the police. Dawn left. Lisa sent me her witness statement the same day. I added it to the binder. I now had multiple third-party witnesses and documented abuse. I was ready for the meeting. On the night of the meeting, I arrived 15 minutes early. The clubhouse parking lot was full. I walked to the entrance and saw Dawn standing near the door with her rolling cart and a clipboard. She saw me and blocked the door. She said I was not on the attendance list. I said there was no attendance list. She said she created one for security purposes. I said she could not block me from entering. She said she could because I was a safety risk. I pulled out my phone and started recording. She said I was violating her privacy. I said this was a public meeting. A vendor staff member from the landscaping company who was there for a separate agenda item saw the confrontation and told Dawn to leave the property. He said he was a contracted vendor, and he had every right to report her behavior to the board. Dawn stepped aside, but she followed me into the meeting room. The room was packed. I sat in the front row. Dawn sat in the board section with her cart. The board president called the meeting to order and started with routine business. After 30 minutes, he opened the floor for resident comments. I stood and gave my name and unit number. I said I was here to report HOA abuse and theft. Dawn interrupted and said I was out of order. The president said I had the floor. I said Dawn accused me of package theft and planted evidence near my trash cans. I said I had doorbell camera footage that proved she was at my unit the night before she filed the complaint. Dawn stood and said the footage was doctored. I pulled out my tablet and turned the screen toward the board. I played the clip. The timestamp was clear. The shadow matched Dawn's clothing. The torn mailer appeared after she left. The room went silent. I said Dawn also filed a fake hearing notice and imposed fraudulent fees. I said she deleted my portal uploads and moved deadlines to make me miss appeals. I said she tried to ban me from the pool and threatened vendors. I said she had access to the pool shed and we found stolen property inside. I said police were investigating. I said the missing pool keys turned up in the shed and only leadership had access. Dawn shouted that I was lying. I pulled the sealed evidence bag from my jacket and held it up. I said Marcus found the keys hidden under a tarp. I said the police had photos of the shed and the stolen items. Dawn said I planted the keys. Marcus stood and said he witnessed the shed search and took photos himself. Gene stood and said he saw Dawn in the shed the week the keys went missing. The board president asked Dawn to respond. She said this was a coordinated attack. She said I was manipulating evidence and recruiting residents to lie. The president said he wanted to see all the evidence. I handed him my binder. He flipped through it. He saw the doorbell clip screenshots, the portal audit log, the tow company call log, the police incident number, the witness statements, and the photos of the shed. He looked at Dawn. He asked if she had any documentation to support her complaint. She opened her cart and pulled out a thin folder. He reviewed it. The folder had a single printed notice with no signature line and a photo of my porch that was taken from a public walkway. The president said the notice was not properly executed. He said there was no proof of delivery. He said the complaint was dismissed. Dawn said she had discretion. He said discretion does not override bylaws. He said the board would be conducting a full review of compliance actions and all fees would be refunded pending the outcome. Dawn tried to speak, but the president cut her off. He said the meeting was moving to the next agenda item. Dawn gathered her card and walked out. The room stayed silent for a few seconds, and then people started whispering. After the meeting, several residents came up and thanked me. One woman said Dawn fined her twice for the same violation. Another man said Dawn deleted his maintenance request and then blamed him for not following up. I gave them my contact information and said they should document everything and request a records review. The next week, the property manager called and said the board voted to suspend Dawn from compliance duties pending an investigation. She said the management company was conducting an audit of all actions Dawn took in the past 6 months. She said my fees were reversed and my pool access was restored. She said the police were still investigating the shed contents. I asked if Dawn was being removed from the board. The manager said that required a recall vote and the process was just starting. I said I wanted copies of the audit findings. She said they would be available under the records request policy. I submitted another written request and paid the fee. 2 weeks later, the audit report arrived. The report showed Dawn issued over 200 violation notices in 6 months. 90% were dismissed or overturned on appeal. She deleted 47 portal uploads. She moved or canceled 15 hearing dates without notice. She imposed over $6,000 in administrative fees that were not authorized by the bylaws. The report also noted that Dawn had access to the pool shed, the clubhouse office, and the mailroom. Security footage showed her entering the shed alone on multiple occasions outside of normal maintenance schedules. The report recommended immediate removal and referral to law enforcement. The board scheduled a special meeting to vote on removal. I attended. Dawn did not show. The board voted unanimously to remove her from all positions. The president said the association was updating its policies to require oversight and documentation for all compliance actions. He said the HOA was required to preserve records and stop deleting portal uploads. He apologized to residents for the abuse. Several people clapped. The police investigation continued for another month. The detective called and said they matched fingerprints on the stolen items to Dawn. She was charged with theft and abuse of office. The district attorney offered a plea deal. Dawn pled guilty to misdemeanor theft and was sentenced to community service and restitution. She was also banned from serving on any HOA board in the county. The stolen items were returned to residents when possible. The pool keys were returned to the office. I got a letter from the HOA attorney saying the association settled with me for the fraudulent fees and harassment. They refunded all fees, reimbursed my legal expenses, and issued a formal apology. The letter also said the board adopted new rules requiring transparency and accountability for compliance actions. All violation notices now require a signature and proof of delivery. All hearings require at least 10 days' notice. All fees must be approved by the full board. The portal audit log is now public, and residents can review it anytime. Marcus was elected to the board in the next election. He ran on a transparency platform and won by a landslide. He said his first priority was making sure no one could pull what Dawn did ever again. Gene joined the compliance committee as a volunteer. He said he wanted to keep an eye on things. Lisa started a resident advocacy group to help people fight bogus violations. The group meets once a month at the clubhouse, and they review cases and share evidence strategies. Dawn moved out of the neighborhood 3 months later. She sold her unit, and I never saw her again. The new compliance chair is a retired accountant who takes the job seriously but follows the rules. He sends notices with tracking numbers, and he publishes a monthly report of all actions. People actually trust the system now. I kept all my records in case I ever needed them again. I still check the portal every week. I still keep my doorbell camera running. I learned that receipts matter, witnesses matter, and staying calm under pressure is the only way to win against someone who weaponizes the rules. The funny thing is, Dawn tried to flex with those pool keys during one of our confrontations. She pulled them out of her pocket to prove she had authority. She waved them in front of me like a badge. Then she tried to put them back and dropped the entire ring on the ground in front of everyone. Keys went everywhere. She scrambled to pick them up while people watched. It was the first time I saw her lose composure. That moment told me everything I needed to know. She was never in control. She was just loud. If you made it this far, hit subscribe for more real-world HOA drama and lawful payback stories. The board meeting where the audit results were read out loud was packed. People wanted to see what happened. The president went through the findings line by line. When he got to the part about the shed and the stolen items, he held up the evidence photos. He said a key log review proved only leadership had access to that shed during the time window when the thefts occurred. He said the log was automated and could not be altered. He said Dawn was the only board member who entered the shed alone on the dates in question. Dawn's credibility collapsed in front of everyone. She tried to interrupt, but the president said she would have a chance to respond at the end. She never got that chance because she walked out before he finished. The aftermath was quiet but satisfying. The new rules made it almost impossible for anyone to abuse the system the way Dawn did. The board published a quarterly transparency report showing every violation, every fee, and every appeal. Residents started attending meetings again because they trusted the process. The property manager told me the association was getting fewer complaints and fewer legal threats. She said the culture shift was real and it started with people like me refusing to back down when the system was being weaponized. I still see Gene at the pool sometimes. He always gives me a nod and says he is glad someone finally stood up. Marcus invited me to join the board, but I declined. I said I did my part and I trust him to keep it clean. He laughed and said he would hold me to that if things ever got messy again. I told him I kept the binder and I would be ready. The landscaping supervisor stopped by my unit one day and thanked me for exposing Dawn. He said she tried to get his company blacklisted with other HOAs in the area, but it backfired when word got out about the charges. He said his business actually grew because people respected that he stood up to her. I said I appreciated him stepping in that night at the clubhouse. He said it was the right thing to do. The final humiliation moment came during the police evidence review. The detective asked Dawn to open a storage tote that was seized from the shed. She claimed she did not have a key. He said the tote had her name on the lid. She said someone must have planted it. He opened it with bolt cutters. Inside was a stash of small items, more package contents, a second set of pool keys, and a ledger with handwritten notes tracking fees she imposed. The ledger showed she was pocketing some of the administrative fees by coding them as miscellaneous expenses. The detective read some of the entries out loud. Dawn could not explain any of it. The tow yard dispatcher was there as a witness because Dawn tried to use his company to pressure residents. He shook his head and said he was glad he refused her calls. A stash container opened in front of everyone and Karen could not explain it. That was the moment her entire defense fell apart. The restitution payments took 6 months. Dawn had to pay back the stolen items and the fraudulent fees. She also had to cover the cost of the audit and the legal fees the HOA incurred defending against her actions. The total was over $20,000. She sold her unit to cover it. The buyer was a young couple who had no idea about the history. I thought about warning them, but Marcus said it was better to let it go. He said the new compliance system would protect them and everyone else. I agreed. The past was done and the neighborhood was better for it. I went back to work and focused on my job. My probation period ended and I got a permanent position. My supervisor said I handled the HOA situation professionally and it showed I could manage pressure. I did not tell him how close I came to losing my cool during some of those confrontations. I just said I kept records and followed the process. He said that was exactly the right approach and he was glad to have me on the team. I thanked him and got back to inspections. Life went back to normal, or as normal as it gets when you live in an HOA. The difference now was that the rules worked the way they were supposed to. No one was above them and no one could weaponize them without consequences. I still drive past the clubhouse on my way out of the neighborhood. I see the bright cone storage area where Dawn used to stage her authority theatrics. The cones are still there, but no one uses them anymore. The new compliance chair does not need props. He just follows the bylaws and treats people with respect. That is all it ever needed to be. I am glad you tuned in.